All right, I'm here with Brad Klein, the voice of the Screaming Eagles. Year 2 is a lot different from year 1. This is year 2 in Division I college basketball. They just made the transition from Division II. 8-24 record this year. Overall, how was this year different from year 1 in Division II?
Very different. I mean, look, it's just a different team, right? And that's the reality of the transfer portal. You're going to lose some players. Isaiah Swope being one of them, probably the biggest name, at least locally. And then you lose other players like Jelani Simmons and Trevor Lakes, and that's going to put a dent on the roster. So Stan Gerard and the rest of the staff, they had to kind of reinvent the wheel as they're going to try and do this offseason and reload with a bunch of new players and players that are trying to do something that is kind of unprecedented, and that's have success in the transition window from D2 to D1.
Overall, if you look at the season, probably not exactly what they expected, but it wasn't far off, right? 8-24, not great in terms of conference, but we'll get to that. Starting the non-conference at the beginning of the year, you had these juggernauts of Michigan State, the Dukes, even the game against Bucknell was not too easy. St. Louis. What does the non-conference strength of schedule or the non-conference schedule do for this team moving forward? You know,
Stan Gerard, the head coach, has been pretty open about the big games, right? The Dukes and the Michigan States, and that's something that's really exciting for the players and for the fans. He's been open about the adverse effects that those games have had on the rest of the season, and that's the type of thing that can be debated and can be decided, and I guess we'll kind of see when the next year's schedule comes out and see what Coach Gerard and the rest of the staff wants to do. But bottom line is, against the big teams, those nationwide brands in Duke and Michigan State, Southern Indiana held their own, right? They paced Michigan State in the second half, 37-all. They actually outscored Duke in the first half and then kind of crumbled in the second. But in those big games, in those two really, really big games, we call them buy games because the university profits, financially speaking, from those games, and Duke and Michigan State pay them, they held their own. So that was something to be proud of.
Now, Ken Pom has them as the second toughest OVC non-conference strength of schedule. If you follow Ken Pom religiously, then that's a big deal. Duke and Michigan State, certainly two of the older college basketball programs in the country, two of the more exciting college basketball programs in the country. What was that experience like for you, getting to go and call those games in those cathedrals of basketball?
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun for the players, like I said. I mean, look, some of the players were there at USI to play in those games. And then I can't say I'm here to call those games, but it's certainly a lot of fun. It's certainly a bucket list thing when you get to go to Cameron Indoor Stadium, the Breslin Center, and you get to check those off the bucket list and say, hey, I was there where the biggest names in college basketball, Krzyzewski, Izzo, but now Shire, Izzo, coach and play and compete at the highest level.
Let's transition into the regular season, the OVC conference regular season. Not exactly what they were looking for. Didn't have a great start, didn't have a great finish, didn't have a great in between, but it was just above where they needed to be able to make the postseason. Describe what you saw throughout conference play from this team.
It was a very difficult season for this team. You look at the conference schedule, you judge the team on the conference schedule, and going into the conference slate, they were playing without Jordan Tillman, and that's a player that they removed from the team, a captain, one of their best scorers, and you can make the argument the team's most talented scorer, removed from the team shortly after the Duke game, after that long road trip, kind of a turning point in the season, maybe not in a positive way for this team. The LaSalle, Bucknell, and Duke trip that kind of happened around Thanksgiving, and it was a 9-night road trip, and something that Stan Gerard had never done before, that duration of a trip, but they go with Tillman, they leave without him, essentially. And like I said, to lose a captain and a scorer, the best on-ball defender on the team, really, really difficult to make up for that on or off the court. And from there, you felt that effect in conference.
Tillman left. Obviously, in the offseason, Isaiah Swope transferred out, went to Indiana State. He's now back in the transfer portal. But who filled the shoes of Jordan Tillman as the conference slate went on?
It was Jeremiah Hernandez. You know, Hernandez really, really stepped up. First team All-OVC player by the end of the season, and everyone knew that Hernandez really needed to step up. He averaged less than 5 points per game last year. Ironically, that's the highest returning scorer going into this past season because you lost Simmons and Lakes and Swope and Polakovic on top of that. So everyone knew it had to be Hernandez, and it was, averaging about 17 points per game. And again, a first-team All-OVC player at that.
Throughout the entire conference slate, the record wasn't exactly great, but a lot of conversations we had throughout the year during the season, you told me that their record didn't exactly indicate how good they were or maybe what their potential was. What was their potential and why was the record not indicative of that?
There are so many different things that happen on and off the court that determine record, and so many things that you see in practice and you see on the road. You're with the team like I am, you know what this team is capable of. Number one, there were injuries at the end of the season. That's going to happen. Nick Kittle goes down with an injury, the starting center, by the end of the year, some off-the-court things, and Keyron Powell gets suspended for a big game at the end of the year. But at the end of the day, I think what really needs to be said about this team and this year with the struggles is that Coach Gerard, the rest of the staff, and the players had to figure out how to make something out of what was, to start, nothing, because they lost so much in the transfer portal, and they had to get this new group. They lost about 90% of their scoring. So, like I said at the beginning, reinvent the wheel, and they were trying to do that on the fly, and that's easier said than done.
It certainly is.
And it's not very easy when you say it either.
No, it's not. And it's not easy when you lose a couple of games heading into the postseason tournament, which you barely make at that point, right? It came down to the last game and a half, 2 games, or it was, and you needed multiple teams to win and lose that were against you. It was a whole big thing. But they got in. That was the important part in year 2 of Division I. They didn't exactly do what they wanted to do in that postseason game, to say the least. But what was the game plan kind of going into the postseason there?
Well, you think back on the regular season, that's where it really all starts, and they lost a handful of games by single digits, by, I should say, 1 possession or even 2. So you know that this team is capable of competing against Tennessee State. That was the first round of the OVC tournament, and you knew that this team could compete because they had beaten Tennessee State earlier in the season. In fact, it's one of the best wins of the season, and they lost. Why did they lose? Well, A.J. Smith, their second best player or their best player, however you want to cut it, but their second best scorer and their leading rebounder, he goes down with an injury within the first minute of the game. Hernandez, the all-OVC first-team player, team's leading scorer, he never played because of the flu. And even with that, Southern Indiana was in it at halftime, and in fact, they were leading at halftime. And from there, the second half kind of crumbled, and they ran out of gas. And it's kind of a bit of a microcosm of the season, if you will. But so they get one and done in the first round of the OVC tournament.
And that happens, right? That happens. That's a way that a team can learn to grow and build in the next year. If you had to grade the season on a scale from A to F, you can use plus minuses. What would you grade the season and why?
I guess a C, C minus, right? Because at the end of the day, you're judged off of your record. We could talk about all the ancillary things that happened adjacent to the program, around the program, and why this team did not succeed to the level that everyone was hoping that they would. 8 wins is not enough for Coach Gerard, for his standards, for the fan standards. It's just not enough. So that's why you're probably going C minus. Why do I not give it something lower? Because again, they had so many obstacles, more so than the other programs that they were competing against. Yes, the injuries, but also the transfer portal was just a decimating effect for this team. And on top of that, having to recruit in the transfer portal when you can't make the NCAA tournament and you have other different things holding you back in the Division II to Division I transition, it is playing at a disadvantage.
One thing that we talked about a couple of weeks ago with Jevin Redmond was the transfer portal and NIL deals. That controls college basketball right now. There is a big bubble around college sports, and that is the transfer portal as well as NIL. How does that affect this team? Stan Gerard's team, because now you have to recruit your own players, which you didn't have to do before.
Yeah, and right now Jeremiah Hernandez, A.J. Smith, they're both in the transfer portal. So is Keyron Powell, the bossy kid. So is Javius Moore, and there are a bunch of other players in the transfer portal. Southern Indiana right now has lost more than they've gained in the portal, and that's the reality of the situation. So it's basically free agency. If you're a fan of professional sports, just treat it like free agency at this point. And NIL deals are certainly a reality of college athletics, not going away. And right now, that's another thing on top of the postseason transition suspension, the ban in the 4 years from D2 to D1, that we know is going to keep USI from competing to the level that they're capable of and reaching that potential. NIL and building up the NIL reputation, the purse and the collectives, plural, because there are multiple collectives, those two things especially are going to keep USI from competing, or excuse me, I should say from expecting to compete at the highest level. Heck, next year they can go out and they can win some games, and they certainly hope to, but they're right now playing at a disadvantage because of those two things.
Well, if you look forward, look past this year, obviously, like you said, 2 more years of ineligibility from the NCAA postseason if they were to either one of get an automatic bid through the tournament or at an at-large bid. What's next for this team? I know a lot of fans are kind of on the edge because of all the transfer portal stuff and the NIL issues here and there. What's next for this team moving forward? What can we expect throughout the offseason, and even if you want to play Genie or the crystal ball, what can we expect for the next season?
It's a good question. I'll answer it in 2 ways, the immediate future and the distant future, right? So the immediate future is the transfer portal closes May 1st. So at that point, that's where USI's roster will really start to come together in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye on that. And it's the type of thing that with the NIL disadvantage, with the reality of not being able to compete in the NCAA-sponsored postseasons, Stan Gerard and his staff, they're going to have to try and make do with those obstacles. That's the immediate future. So we don't know who's on the roster. That's why I can't give you a crystal ball on next season specifically. But what I keep on telling USI fans who ask me is that this team will compete eventually. And I don't think it's going to be very long from now. You mentioned it, 2 more years of NCAA postseason ineligibility. By the time you get through that kind of shackle and forest of ineligibility, right, you have an opportunity with a deeper pocket in NIL, and now you can go to the tournament. Plus, if anyone's been to Screaming Eagles Arena, they know it's a great facility. Evansville, Indiana, I don't have to say this to the viewers. It is a central city. You have a bunch of different cities to recruit from: Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati, and everywhere in between. St. Louis, there's a lot of talent there here in the Midwest, and I believe Stan Gerard and his squad's going to find it once they have maybe more of a level playing field with the transition from D2 to D1.
Gets you excited for next season.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully it gets you excited as well. That's Brad Klein, the voice of the Screaming Eagles. Always a pleasure talking to you. We will talk soon.
All right, sounds good.